Do you remember the church potluck dishes only your Black grandparents knew? Those meals filled fellowship halls with laughter, gospel, and the smell of love cooked slow and shared wide. What happened to the recipes that once held an entire community together? It was not just dessert, it was testimony. Sweet potato casserole with pecan topping had a way of making its presence known long before you saw it. The smell filled every hallway, the buttery sweetness of roasted potatoes rising through the church basement like a hymn of its own. Every Black grandmother who baked it knew what she was doing. It was a bridge between Sunday service and Sunday joy, between what you gave to God and what you gave to your neighbors. The recipe was never written down, but everyone knew the rhythm by heart. Mash the potatoes until smooth, stir in brown sugar and milk, top with pecans like jewels on a crown. Those nuts toasted golden under the oven's heat while the filling bubbled underneath, silky and rich. Children waited by the kitchen door, sneaking tastes when no one looked, knowing this was the kind of sweetness you could only find in a church kitchen. The casserole dish itself was often chipped and worn, carried from home to potluck year after year like an heirloom that refused to retire. It was made for comfort and company, not for show. And every time it landed on the long wooden tables covered in floral cloth, it said something words could not. That even through hard weeks and heavy hearts, there would always be enough sweetness to go around. Smothered pork chops were Sunday strength on a plate. Thick cuts of pork cooked slow in onion gravy until every bite fell apart at the touch of a fork. The grandmothers who made them did not rush anything, because flavor took time and love took patience. They browned the chops in cast-iron skillets that had seen decades of dinners, letting the sizzle mark the start of the feast. Then came the onions, sliced thin, fried golden, and stirred with broth and flour until the whole kitchen smelled like home. Those pans were never washed too hard, because that seasoning was history. By the time the chops were done, the gravy had turned deep and glossy, clinging to rice, biscuits, or whatever was served beside it. Folks lined up early at the church table for this dish, knowing it would be gone before the choir even finished their song. It was not fancy food, it was memory food, the kind that reminded you who raised you and how much care could live inside one skillet. Even now, if you ever smell that rich gravy cooking, it feels like stepping back into a kitchen where laughter and faith never ran out. Collard greens with ham hocks were the backbone of every potluck table, steaming and savory, filling the room with their deep, earthy scent. The greens were washed over and over in cool water, not just to clean them, but to honor the work that went into growing them. The ham hocks simmered for hours until the meat softened, sending flavor through every leaf. The pot itself would tremble gently on the stove as if humming along with the gospel songs on the radio. Grandmothers knew the timing by feel, not clocks, tasting the broth and nodding when it was ready. A good pot of greens could stretch a meal, feed a family, and feed a crowd all the same. When carried into the church basement, the steam fogged the lids of the serving trays, and everyone nearby could smell the salt, the smoke, and the love. These greens told stories about sharecropping days, about Sunday rest after long weeks, about making something nourishing from whatever you had. Nothing on that table ever felt more alive. Even if money was tight, you could always count on greens to show up, hearty and humble, served with hot sauce and pride. Baked macaroni and cheese was the crown jewel of every church supper, golden and bubbling beneath its crust. The noodles were cooked just enough, layered with sharp cheddar and evaporated milk in heavy pans that once belonged to someone's mother. No one used measurements, just instinct passed down through taste and touch. When that oven door opened, the smell alone made people drift toward the kitchen. The cheese melted into a silky river, clinging to each noodle until it became more than a side dish. It was family history disguised as comfort food. Kids hovered close with their plates, hoping to get the corner pieces where the cheese crisped just right. Grandmothers guarded their recipes but always shared a serving, smiling at the next generation and saying, "Now this is how it's supposed to taste." On potluck Sundays, the pan came back scraped clean, proof that love and patience never wasted. It was food that reminded people of who they were and why the best things in life take a little time to bake. Fried whiting fish was the heartbeat of summer services and Sunday fundraisers, popping and hissing in cast-iron skillets behind the church. The fish was dredged in seasoned cornmeal, fried until golden and crisp, the edges curling slightly as they hit the hot oil. The sound alone could bring a crowd. Children ran back and forth with paper plates while elders fanned themselves with church programs, laughing and waiting for the next batch. You could taste the salt of the sea, the crunch of tradition, the work of hands that knew how to stretch a meal. Fried whiting was affordable, filling, and familiar, something every soul food cook could trust to come out right. Sometimes it was served with white bread and mustard, sometimes with coleslaw and hush puppies, but always with pride. It was food that traveled well, from kitchen to fellowship hall to picnic table, and it never lost its magic. Every piece was a little miracle of patience and grease, the taste of good company and good faith. Candied yams were memory disguised as dessert, gleaming under syrup that caught the light like stained glass. They started as humble sweet potatoes, peeled and sliced by hand, then simmered with butter, sugar, and a whisper of cinnamon until they melted into themselves. Every forkful felt like Sunday comfort, the kind that lingered even after the plates were cleared. The smell filled every corner of the church hall, warm and familiar, bringing people back to childhood kitchens. There was something sacred about watching elders spoon them out with quiet pride. This dish did not need decoration. It already carried the glow of love. The yams were passed down like stories, like names, unchanged through generations because nothing about them needed fixing. When people said, "sweet," this is what they meant. The caramel syrup bubbled thick and glossy, coating every piece in warmth, the kind that stuck to memory long after taste faded. Sometimes a sprinkle of nutmeg or clove gave it a deeper note, but never too much. The sweetness spoke for itself. Candied yams did not rush. They took their time, slow and sure, like all things made with patience and heart. On church tables, their color alone brought smiles, that deep orange glow of comfort that meant home had arrived. Cornbread dressing had the power to hush a crowded room. Crumbly, golden, and rich with sage and broth, it was the dish everyone waited for. It started with leftover cornbread, dried and crumbled, then mixed with onions, celery, and whatever broth simmered on the stove that day. The smell rose thick and savory as it baked, the edges crisping just right. It carried the weight of care, a dish that took planning, patience, and heart. At church suppers, people lined up twice just to get another scoop. It was heavy with meaning, like Sunday itself, feeding body and spirit in equal measure. Each bite was tender but bold, soaked through with flavor and memory. The secret was always in the seasoning. Not just sage, but the way it was stirred by someone who knew exactly when it felt right. It was a dish that demanded respect, the kind that made silence fall between bites. Cornbread dressing was not made quickly. It was built layer by layer, like prayer. Even when the pan was scraped clean, the smell lingered, wrapping the room in something that felt a lot like gratitude. Chicken and dumplings were a comfort for the congregation, a stew that could stretch to feed however many people showed up. The broth simmered slow, thick with flour and flavor, while soft dumplings puffed up on top like little clouds. Every spoonful was a reminder that simplicity could still taste divine. It was always served from a big enamel pot, the kind that never stayed empty long. The chicken was tender, the dumplings tenderer, and the warmth endless. Grandmothers stood near the stove, ladling out bowls with quiet smiles, saying, "There's more in the back." It was food that didn't run out, not when love was cooking it. The broth was rich with time and care, deepened by whatever herbs grew in the yard or window box. The dumplings soaked up everything, fluffy yet hearty, made to satisfy both hunger and heartache. You could taste the faith in every bite, the belief that food, like kindness, multiplies when shared. On cold days, this dish healed. On good days, it celebrated. Either way, it fed more than just the body. It fed the soul. String bean casserole with bacon and onions was the kind of dish that looked simple but carried weight. Fresh beans were snapped by hand, tossed into pans with crisp bacon and caramelized onions until the whole kitchen smelled alive. The recipe came before shortcuts, before cans and mixes, when people built flavor from scratch. That first bite was smoky, soft, and sweet. A hymn sung through taste. On church Sundays, this dish always disappeared first. The bowl went around once, twice, and came back empty, a quiet testament to good hands and good memories. The bacon fat gave the beans their soul, coating them in flavor that whispered of long days in the kitchen and even longer days in the fields. A little sugar balanced the salt, a trick passed down by women who knew that even vegetables deserved indulgence. It was a dish that spoke softly but stayed with you, proof that the simplest foods could feel the richest. Okra and tomato stew was the soul of summer on a spoon. The okra simmered down in ripe tomatoes until it turned silky and thick, with peppers and onions joining the mix. It was a dish that knew patience, slow-cooked until every flavor came together like harmony in a choir. The stew was spooned over rice, the juice soaking in just enough to warm you from the inside out. It told the story of fields, faith, and family, of making something rich from what the earth freely gave. Each bowl tasted like history preserved and love made visible. It was the kind of food that drew people close, that made you linger at the table just a little longer. The tang of the tomatoes met the earthiness of the okra, and together they sang of home. A little spice woke it up, but the comfort always remained. Even when the pot was scraped clean, the scent clung to the air, humble, wholesome, and full of grace. Peach cobbler with pie crust strips was the kind of dessert that reminded people what home felt like. You could smell it before you even made it through the church door, that mix of cinnamon, butter, and baked peaches rising through the air like a sweet hymn. Someone's grandmother had brought it from home, wrapped tight in foil and tucked safely in the trunk of her car, so it would still be warm when service ended. The peaches were always ripe, soft from syrup or from the summer heat, and they melted into the crust like gold under sunlight. The pie strips were laid carefully across the top, never in perfect lines but always with love, brushed with melted butter until they baked into crisp ribbons that cracked softly with every scoop. A bowl of peach cobbler was more than dessert. It was reward for long sermons, for tired weeks, for the kind of patience that came from faith and family. The sweetness clung to your tongue and made every bite feel earned. No matter how many tables were filled with cakes or puddings, this one was always gone first. The elders called it real dessert, and the children licked their spoons clean, knowing this was what happiness tasted like. Corn pudding was quiet in its beauty, but it had a way of humbling every plate beside it. Sweet and custardy, it shimmered when it came out of the oven, golden on top and tender within. It started from simple things, eggs, milk, and corn cut fresh from the cob, but it ended as something sacred. This dish spoke of gardens tended by hand, of rows of corn tall enough to touch the sky, and of cooks who turned harvest into grace. Grandmothers measured nothing, just poured and stirred until the texture felt right, tasting the batter with the edge of a spoon. When it baked, the kitchen filled with the kind of smell that made you stop what you were doing. It was soft and creamy, slightly sweet, with little bits of corn giving it a rhythm all its own. At church dinners, it disappeared quietly, spoon by spoon, without needing praise. It was not fancy, but it was honest. And that made it unforgettable. Every family had their own little trick, a splash of cream here, a dusting of nutmeg there. But no matter how it was made, it always carried the same heart. You could find it on tables beside roast chicken, collard greens, or baked macaroni, holding its own with quiet dignity. It was the kind of dish that reminded everyone that love did not have to shout. Sometimes it simply glowed. Barbecue meatballs were the kind of dish that drew laughter before the first bite. Sticky, sweet, and warm, they traveled in covered pans from kitchens to church halls, ready to be passed around on toothpicks while the children hovered close. They were coated in a thick, tangy sauce made from ketchup, sugar, and love, bubbling on the stove until it clung to every inch of meat. Each bite was tender, smoky, and comforting, like a backyard memory folded into Sunday supper. At potlucks, they came out first, the unofficial welcome before the main course. The elders teased each other about who made them best, and the kids cleaned the tray long before the second round of prayers. It was food meant for sharing, for talking, for laughing, for feeding hearts as much as stomachs. The sauce left a shine on every plate and a sweetness on every smile. It was not about perfection. Some came out too soft, others too sticky, but about joy, pure and simple. They were made in the same pans that cooked Sunday dinners for generations, pans seasoned by years of care and community. When you saw those meatballs sitting on the table, you knew you were home, no matter whose church you were in. Baked chicken with paprika and butter was the definition of simplicity done right. It was seasoned deeply, not just with spices, but with care. Every piece rubbed and wrapped in foil before heading to church. As it baked, the skin turned bronze under the melted butter, crisping at the edges and tender at the bone. The smell alone could make a whole congregation hungry. There was nothing showy about it, no sauces, no tricks, just seasoning, butter, and faith that heat and patience would do the rest. When it came out of the foil, steam rose like a blessing, filling the room with warmth. It was one of those dishes that reminded everyone that good cooking did not need to be complicated. It just needed love and time. The taste was honest: smoky paprika, golden butter, and the memory of family kitchens where laughter mixed with the scent of supper. Some cooks added garlic or onion powder, others brushed honey across the top for a faint glaze, but all of them shared one truth: this chicken never failed. It brought people together, filled bellies, and softened even the hardest weeks. In a world that moved too fast, this dish reminded everyone that some things are worth slowing down for. Potato salad with relish and mustard was more than a side dish. It was a personality test. Every cook had their version, and every family swore theirs was the right one. Some liked it tangy, some liked it sweet, but everyone agreed that no table was complete without it. The potatoes were boiled just enough, diced while still warm, and folded into a golden mix of mustard, mayo, relish, and devotion. The smell was bright and sharp, the color like sunlight in a bowl. People debated texture, spice, and temperature, but what they were really debating was memory. The way it used to taste in Grandma's kitchen, or how Auntie made it every Easter. It was a dish that sparked stories and laughter, the kind of food that carried a family's history one spoonful at a time. Some versions had eggs, others did not. Some added celery, others swore it ruined the crunch. But no matter whose bowl you scooped from, it always felt familiar. It was the taste of picnics, church lawns, and summer Sundays, of togetherness wrapped in flavor. When the spoon hit the bottom of the bowl, it was never disappointment that followed, just a quiet smile and the thought, next time, I'll make a little more. Fried cabbage with smoked sausage was fast, filling, and full of flavor. The sizzle of cabbage hitting hot oil was a sound every cook knew, followed by the deep smell of sausage browning at the bottom of the pan. Salt, pepper, and a touch of vinegar turned it into something more than the sum of its parts. It was a weekday meal turned Sunday comfort, made to stretch and satisfy. At the church potluck, it never stayed warm for long. Too many hands reaching for seconds, too many memories of home-cooked simplicity. It was food that said, "You are cared for," even when life was hard. Every family had their own way of doing it. Some added onions or red pepper flakes, others poured in a splash of broth for a softer bite. It was quick, but never careless, made with the same devotion as a feast. The smell filled kitchens and church halls alike, a scent of warmth that could turn any room into home. Grandmothers cooked it for those they loved, believing a full belly was the first step toward peace. It was a reminder that comfort could be simple and that even the humblest vegetables, when cooked with care, could taste like celebration. Black-eyed peas with fatback were tradition and superstition rolled into one pot. They were cooked slow, bubbling with bits of salted pork until the broth turned rich and smoky. Folks said eating them brought good luck, especially on New Year's, but luck aside, they always brought joy. The beans were soft but hearty, carrying the taste of generations who knew how to make a little go far. They were spooned over rice or cornbread, served beside greens, and eaten with quiet gratitude. It was food tied to faith, humble, soulful, and steady as a prayer. The smell of simmering beans meant more than hunger being fed. It meant hope was alive. In many homes, they were the first dish made each new year, a promise that blessings would multiply. At church potlucks, you could always find them near the end of the line, still hot, still comforting, still symbolic. Every spoonful tasted like patience and persistence, like history preserved through flavor. It was a dish that carried memory and meaning, a bowl full of both nourishment and belief. Homemade rolls were the smell of morning in the church kitchen. They were kneaded before sunrise, the dough rising slowly under dish towels while the choir practiced upstairs. When they baked, the air turned sweet and yeasty, wrapping the room in warmth. Each roll came out soft, brushed with melted butter until it glistened. The elders sliced them open to make sandwiches. The children tore them apart with eager hands. You could taste the effort, the patience, the tenderness in every bite. Bread like that could quiet a room. Some were made in cast-iron skillets, others in long trays that came out golden and steaming. They were shared by hand, passed down rows of tables as people smiled and nodded in thanks. It was not just bread, it was belonging. When someone new joined the congregation, a roll on their plate meant they were family now. The smell of butter melting into fresh bread was the scent of welcome itself, soft, simple, and sacred. Banana pudding with vanilla wafers was the grand finale, the dish that made eyes widen and voices hush. Layers of pudding, bananas, and cookies rested under whipped cream, chilled until the first spoon broke the surface. The wafers softened just enough to melt with the custard, creating a texture so smooth it felt like nostalgia itself. Every bite was sweet, creamy, and cool, cutting through the heat of the day and the spice of every other dish. It was always gone before anyone finished their first plate. Some versions had meringue browned on top, others kept it plain and cold, but all of them carried the same kind of comfort. The glass bowls they were served in were treasured, polished carefully, and wrapped in dishcloths for transport. Banana pudding was celebration food, but also healing food, brought to baby showers, funerals, and homecomings alike. It reminded everyone that sweetness could be shared, that love could be layered just as carefully as custard and cookies. Cornbread and buttermilk salad was as humble as it was brilliant. Crumbled cornbread soaked in cold buttermilk, mixed with chopped onions and fresh vegetables, became a dish that belonged to the land itself. It was cool, tangy, and filling, perfect for long Sundays when the sun sat heavy over the churchyard. Farmers and families alike brought it in old bowls wrapped in towels, proud of its simplicity. It was a taste of the rural South, honest, refreshing, and made for those who knew the power of making do. The buttermilk cooled the tongue after spicy dishes, while the cornbread soaked up every drop, turning creamy and rich. Every bite told the story of people who knew how to survive on what the land offered and still eat like kings. Some added tomatoes, others green onions, but all agreed it was best served with laughter nearby. It was proof that even the plainest food could taste like blessing. Fried green tomatoes were crisp and tangy, fried in cast iron and served beside every meat dish like they belonged there all along. Each slice was dipped in cornmeal and flour, seasoned just right, and fried until golden bubbles of oil whispered against the edges. They came out sizzling, a little tart from the tomato, a little smoky from the skillet. They were the kind of dish that taught you balance, how to take something firm and sour and turn it into comfort. At church picnics and homecomings, they sat proudly beside baked chicken, fried fish, or ham, cutting through the heaviness with their bright bite. The crunch echoed through the room as people talked and laughed, plates full and spirits fuller. Fried green tomatoes were never just a side. They were a reminder that flavor could come from patience and faith. You could tell when someone used a fresh tomato, not too ripe, not too soft, because it fried up crisp, never soggy. Grandmothers guarded their methods, swearing by buttermilk baths and heavy pans seasoned with years of love. When that cast iron hit the heat, the smell alone could draw the whole church kitchen near. It was simple food that held its head high, a Southern staple that turned the ordinary into something worth celebrating. Red velvet cake was pure Southern pride dressed in red. Its color came from cocoa, vinegar, and sometimes beet juice in the old days, long before bottled food coloring did the work. The crumb was tender and rich, the flavor subtle but deep, and the frosting, cream cheese whipped to silk, made it shine. It was the kind of dessert that could stop a conversation mid-sentence, that made even the elders ask for seconds with a smile. On church tables, it gleamed under the light, a symbol of joy, love, and togetherness. No celebration was complete without it, whether it was a wedding, homecoming, or choir anniversary. The first slice always drew applause. The last one left everyone wishing for more. Some baked it tall and proud, others thin and layered, but the care never changed. Making red velvet was a ritual, measuring slow, folding gently, praying it rose just right. The first whiff of cocoa and vanilla filled kitchens with promise. When it finally cooled and the frosting went on, it was more than cake. It was beauty, patience, and tradition all baked into one. Pinto beans and rice with smoked turkey were the quiet heart of every kitchen crew meal. Simple, humble, and soul-deep, they cooked all morning on the back of the stove while everyone else hurried around preparing bigger dishes. The beans softened slow, taking on the smoky salt of turkey wings or necks, turning the broth dark and rich. When poured over rice, it became a full meal, hearty, filling, and honest. It was not fancy, but it was faithful. The smell filled the air long before noon, a signal that good food and good company were near. For the church kitchen crew, this was fuel and comfort both. A bowl of beans between shifts reminded them why they cooked: to serve, to feed, to love. Each spoonful tasted like gratitude. The beans didn't rush. They took their time, bubbling softly until every bit of flavor settled into place. There was always enough to share, because food like this stretched, and so did kindness. Sweet tea and lemonade mix, lovingly called church punch, was the taste of fellowship in a glass. Poured from giant pitchers into plastic cups that never seemed to run out, it cooled everyone after the sermon. The mix of sweet tea and tart lemonade was just right, sweet enough to please the elders, tangy enough to wake up the children. No matter how many people filled the hall, there was always more to pour. It wasn't bought or bottled, it was stirred by hand, with ice clinking like a choir of tiny bells. Someone always knew the perfect balance: a little more sugar, a touch more lemon, and the crowd trusted them like scripture. On hot days, it was salvation in liquid form, washing down every bite of fried chicken, collard greens, or pie. It wasn't just a drink, it was tradition, a cooling pause that reminded everyone that joy could be simple. Chitlins and hot sauce were for the brave, the seasoned, the ones who remembered the old ways. Cleaned and cooked slow, they carried a smell that filled the kitchen long before anyone tasted them. But for those who grew up with them, that smell was history, home, and honor all at once. The elders prepared them carefully, washing and boiling with onions, vinegar, and love until they were tender enough to melt. When served with a splash of hot sauce, they became more than food. They became legacy. At church homecomings or after revivals, this dish showed respect to those who had endured hard times and still celebrated. Not everyone loved them, but everyone understood them. They were proof of resilience, a reminder of how much could be done with so little. The younger ones might wrinkle their noses, but they knew better than to refuse a plate. Chitlins were culture preserved through patience. Chicken spaghetti was the kind of dish that looked humble in the pan but worked miracles in a crowd. Creamy, cheesy, and comforting, it was baked to golden perfection with shredded chicken folded into every strand. The deacon's wife made it best, her kitchen always smelling like garlic, butter, and Sunday hope. It was a casserole that could feed 50 if it had to, and often did. Velvety sauce clung to the noodles, carrying flavor in every bite. When the foil was peeled back, the cheese stretched in soft ribbons and the whole room leaned closer. It was the kind of food that said, "You are welcome here." No one ever left hungry when chicken spaghetti was on the table. Some added peppers or mushrooms, others stuck to the basics, but the feeling was always the same: full, loved, and cared for. Pineapple upside-down cake was pure celebration on a plate. Golden rings of pineapple, cherries nestled in the center, and caramelized sugar bubbling up the sides. It looked like sunshine baked into dessert. It was the dessert that meant something good had happened. Baptisms, anniversaries, or a long service done well. The smell alone could draw people from every corner of the hall. Baked in cast iron or glass pans, it flipped out perfectly when made with patience. Every slice shone with syrupy sweetness, the edges sticky with butter and brown sugar. It was cheerful food, unashamedly bright and joyful. You couldn't be sad eating pineapple upside-down cake. It was a dessert that reminded everyone that life, like baking, is sometimes sweetest when turned upside down. Field peas and rice, known lovingly as Hoppin' John, was a dish tied to hope and heritage. Black-eyed peas, onions, rice, and smoked meat simmered together until the flavors blended into something greater than the sum of its parts. Every spoonful carried meaning, prosperity, faith, and the memory of ancestors who made much from little. Served on New Year's Day, it symbolized blessings for the year ahead. But at church suppers, it meant more than luck. It meant love shared freely. The smell of simmering peas and rice spoke of patience, of hours spent stirring and seasoning until the taste was just right. Whether served plain or with collards on the side, it felt like history you could hold in your hands. Every grain of rice was soaked in story, every bite a quiet prayer. Brown sugar pound cake was heavy in the best way, dense, moist, and rich with caramel flavor. It was the cake that showed up for everything: fundraisers, funerals, and potlucks. You could smell the brown sugar and butter melting together before it even left the oven. Sliced thick, it was sweet, but never too much, a perfect match for coffee or conversation. The crumb was soft yet strong, holding together even when wrapped and carried to church in wax paper. Each slice looked humble, but tasted heavenly. When baked just right, the top cracked beautifully, leaving a crust that was almost candy. It was the kind of dessert that spoke of skill and care, and the kind of hands that knew how to turn simple things into treasure. Even after everyone was full, someone always reached for one last bite. Cabbage and ham casserole was a dish that stretched a little meat a long way. Thin slices of ham folded through cabbage, baked with onions and a touch of cream, turned simple ingredients into something rich. It was food born from wisdom, making enough for many from what seemed too small. The smell filled kitchens with warmth, earthy and savory, like a promise of satisfaction. At church dinners, it was a quiet star, sitting beside bigger dishes but holding its own. The edges browned just right, the cabbage softened to sweetness, and the ham gave it depth. It tasted like frugality turned into art. The cooks who made it knew that abundance wasn't about how much you had. It was about how you shared it. Every serving carried the lesson that love multiplies when given freely. Chinquapin nutcakes offered small moments of sweetness, created from the rich forests of the American South. The Chinquapin, a dwarf chestnut native to the region, produced small, sweet nuts that could be eaten raw or roasted. Enslaved families collected these nuts in autumn, cracked their shells, and ground the meat into a fine meal. Mixed with a little cornmeal, honey, or molasses when available, the nut meal formed small cakes that were baked or cooked on a griddle until golden brown. These cakes carried both nutrition and a sense of celebration, providing rare treats for special gatherings. The flavor, slightly sweeter than a chestnut with a buttery finish, became a cherished memory passed down through generations. Even after emancipation, Chinquapin nuts remained a prized wild harvest in Appalachian and southern communities, though the trees have grown scarce in modern times. Chinquapin nutcakes remind us of the connection between forest abundance and human creativity, transforming a foraged ingredient into a dessert that honored both the landscape and the people who carefully tended its secrets. Field pea salad with hot pepper vinegar offered a cool bite for the hottest southern evenings. Tender field peas were boiled until just soft, then chilled and tossed with diced onions, sweet peppers, and a splash of sharp vinegar infused with fiery peppers. The salad balanced earthy legumes with a bright tang that woke the palate after long days in the sun. Served on wide porches as cicadas sang, it accompanied fried chicken, grilled fish, or simply a hunk of cornbread. Home gardeners prized field peas for their reliability in poor soil, and the vinegar peppers were often homemade, steeped for weeks in glass bottles on sunny windowsills. Guests at summer suppers remembered the sting of the vinegar and the gentle sweetness of the peas as the taste of true Southern hospitality. Today, packaged beans and bottled dressings have replaced the careful soaking and seasoning that once defined the dish, but the memory of its crisp, refreshing bite lingers in kitchens where tradition still holds strong. In the 1960s, fatback and cabbage was a reminder that flavor did not come from abundance, but from knowing how to cook with care. It was a dish that taught respect for every part of the animal and every leaf from the garden. Pork, fatback, and cabbage turned scraps into sustenance. Vegetable pot pie with biscuit crust was one of the cleverest ways to turn leftovers into a comforting meal. My grandmother gathered whatever vegetables were left from the week, beans, carrots, peas, or turnips, and simmered them in a simple gravy. She poured the mixture into a dish and covered it with biscuit dough instead of pie crust, which baked into a golden, fluffy topping. The result was hearty, filling, and deeply satisfying, stretching scraps into something that felt like a Sunday supper. Each slice carried both thrift and comfort, a reminder that nothing from the kitchen was wasted. The biscuit crust gave the dish substance, making it a true dinner instead of just a side. In the 1960s, vegetable pot pie with biscuit crust was common across homes that relied on ingenuity, turning odds and ends into meals that filled plates and warmed hearts. It was survival, wrapped in comfort, food that told the story of resourceful families making the most of what they had. Fried cabbage with onions and bacon grease was one of those meals that made noise before it ever hit your plate. The sizzle in the skillet, the hiss of onions hitting hot fat, and the earthy scent of cabbage frying slow. It was a song of its own. This dish didn't come from luxury, it came from wisdom, from knowing how to make something humble taste like plenty. Cabbage was cheap, easy to grow, and lasted through the seasons, but in the right hands it turned into comfort itself. A spoonful of leftover bacon grease added flavor you couldn't buy, and onions made it rich enough to fill a house with warmth. Grandparents knew this kind of food didn't need measuring cups or fancy timing. It was cooked by sound and smell, stirred until it looked right. Fried cabbage fed families after long days of work, served alongside cornbread or rice, and no one ever complained. Every bite carried a little smoke, a little salt, and a lot of history. It reminded people that survival had its own flavor, one built on making do and making it good. To this day, that first forkful still tastes like resilience dressed up in simplicity. Wild grape connected plantation kitchens to the native abundance of the American South. Muscadine and scuppernong grapes grew untended along fences and forest edges, providing a dependable late summer harvest. Enslaved workers gathered the clusters and crushed them by hand to create a tangy juice that could be fermented slightly for a refreshing drink or boiled into a syrupy must used to season grains and greens. This technique echoed West African traditions of using fruit reductions to brighten savory dishes. After emancipation, muscadine wine and homemade grape jellies became hallmarks of Southern foodways, and small farms still produce them today. The careful gathering and slow simmering required patience and skill, qualities that defined the cooking of those who made the most of every wild resource. Wild grape stands as both a practical recipe and a testament to how African American cooks merged Old World techniques with New World ingredients, leaving a flavor that continues to shape regional preserves and beverages across the Carolinas and Georgia. Cowpea and collard stew combined two powerhouse ingredients that sustained countless families through hard times. Field peas, also known as cowpeas, were simmered slowly with smoky meat and joined by hearty collard greens, creating a dish rich in protein, vitamins, and earthy flavor. The long cooking process filled homes with an aroma that signaled comfort and nourishment. Farmers valued cowpeas for their ability to thrive in poor soil, while collards offered leaves long after other vegetables had withered. Together, they made a meal that cost little but fed many, reflecting a tradition of resourcefulness and care. Mothers and grandmothers seasoned the pot with onions, garlic, and pepper, each adding a personal touch passed down through generations. Families gathered around the table with slices of cornbread to soak up the flavorful broth, finding strength in every spoonful. Though supermarkets now offer endless choices, the slow-simmered union of cowpeas and collards stands as a reminder of a time when simple ingredients created enduring nourishment. Stewed field peas with cornbread was a southern staple that seemed to appear on tables no matter how hard times got. Field peas were inexpensive, easy to grow, and dried well enough to last through seasons, making them a dependable ingredient when other food was scarce. My grandmother simmered them slowly with onion, maybe a scrap of pork if any was left, until the peas broke down into a thick, savory stew. Cornbread was baked alongside, crumbly and warm, and served as the perfect companion, soaking up every bit of broth. Together they made a full meal, packed with enough substance to keep workers fed after long days in the fields or factories. Field peas were humble compared to black-eyed peas or butterbeans, but they carried a taste of the land, earthy and comforting. For families with little money to spare, this pairing was dependable, stretching across generations as a dish of both necessity and pride. Stewed field peas with cornbread filled stomachs, warmed hearts, and reminded everyone that simple food could still be good food. Butterbeans with ham hocks were patience in a pot. They cooked low and slow, bubbling gently until the beans turned creamy and the meat fell apart just right. The smell filled the house for hours, calling everyone to the table before dinner was even served. This was the kind of food that made you feel grounded, simple ingredients doing extraordinary work. Ham hocks added that deep, smoky undertone that wrapped around the beans like a hug. Grandparents didn't need recipes for this. They learned from watching, tasting, and trusting the process. The beans were washed, the hocks browned, and everything left to do its quiet magic. By the time the lid lifted, the air was thick with flavor and memory. These beans weren't fast food. They were food that taught patience, generosity, and pride in a full pot shared with others. Every spoonful carried a story, slow-cooked and soulful. Rabbit and dumplings was the meal that turned a quiet woodland hunt into a hearty family supper when store-bought meat was rare. Hunters brought back rabbits dressed and cleaned, and cooks simmered the lean meat slowly with onions, carrots, and herbs until it fell from the bone. Soft flour dumplings were dropped into the rich broth, swelling as they absorbed the savory flavor and thickened the stew. The dish fed large households through cold nights, stretching a single rabbit to satisfy many plates. Children learned to roll the dumpling dough while elders told stories of patient mornings in the woods and the respect owed to the animal that provided the meal. The aroma of simmering broth filled cabins and farm kitchens, promising comfort after long days of work. With modern markets providing endless options, few families still prepare rabbit in this old style. Yet those who recall the tender meat and pillowy dumplings speak of a warmth and gratitude that no packaged dinner can ever replace. Stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a dish that blended frugality with comfort in a way that stuck with families for decades. Okra, often grown in backyard gardens, went into a simmering pot with onions, tomatoes, and broth until it softened into a thick stew. My grandmother would mix simple cornmeal batter, drop spoonfuls into the bubbling pot, and let the dumplings cook until they puffed into tender bites. The texture of the okra thickened the stew naturally, giving it body without needing flour or cream. Each bowl carried the flavor of the garden, earthy and sustaining, with dumplings that filled the stomachs of tired workers. It was food that came straight from the soil and stretched further than its ingredients suggested. Children grew up eating this dish as a matter of routine, yet it became part of the rhythm of survival. In the 1960s, stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a staple that represented both thrift and ingenuity, turning humble vegetables and flour into something worthy of pride at the dinner table. Roasted sassafras roots provided a fragrant tea with a naturally sweet, slightly spicy flavor that refreshed the spirit and offered mild stimulation. Enslaved gatherers carefully dug the young roots of the sassafras tree, washed them, and roasted them over gentle heat to draw out their aromatic oils. When steeped in hot water, the roasted roots released a deep reddish brew with notes of vanilla and citrus. This tea was enjoyed both for its taste and for traditional medicinal uses, reflecting a blend of African and indigenous knowledge about native plants. After emancipation, sassafras tea became a beloved Southern beverage, eventually serving as the base flavor for the first root beers. The practice demonstrates how a simple foraged root shaped a lasting American flavor that extends far beyond its humble beginnings. Roasted sassafras roots show how understanding the forest's offerings allowed communities to create drinks of comfort and cultural significance from ingredients freely given by the land itself. Which of these dishes reminds you of home? Comment your favorite, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories served warm.